Welcome to Fossil Creek Tree Farm and Nursery. I'm Max. I'm going to be your garden coach today, and we're talking about the queen of flowers, roses, and we'll also be talking about companions for them, since we don't want them to be lonesome. And these days, I think maybe it's not as popular as it was years ago to have just a big rose garden. So, and roses, of course, compared to a long time ago, now we have roses that don't require that much participation. You've heard them called shrub roses or landscape roses. And then many years ago, man, when I think about it, I think, could it be that many years? But 20 years ago or more, Dr. Steve George of Texas A&M came out with an Earthkind program, Earthkind roses. In other words, roses that require minimum participation. They're very tough and beautiful, great combination. So we'll talk about some of those, and I think I may have an example of one. I saw it yesterday out there in the parking lot. We just received them. But so your level of participation will be up to you. If you just want some shrub roses to fit into your landscape to give it a little extra pop and color, we've got those kind of roses. Or if you'd like to have some of the quintessential roses, which hybrid tea, from days gone by, of the big, gorgeous, roses for cutting. That and by the way, they also typically were fragrant. So most of the shrub roses and things like that are not. So you give up something for toughness. But of course, nowadays, even a lot of the hybrid teas are probably tougher than they used to be and don't require as much participation. So don't think of them as needy, because they're not. And of course, one of the ways that you get them to not be needy is fulfill their requirements or their preferences. So it's kind of like you're going to buy a dog and you have a tiny apartment. You're not going to buy a Great Dane. Just sensible. So on roses, you've got to have, I'll go over a few of the things that you need that to make them the most productive. I've got my notes so I don't miss anything. First of all, their situation, 6 hours of sun or more. 8's even better. They'll take it all day, but really a minimum of 8 hours to make them perform. That's how they make their food. Sunshine, hitting a leaf, that's how they work. Of course, air circulation is a plus, because if the air is stagnant and we have some rain and humidity and that kind of thing, that tends to keep foliage wet. And wet foliage kind of equals fungus showing up. And as you watch the weather, you realize it's all around us. They give you the fungus spore count, for the day. Is it high, low, or it's everywhere. So, and the way that you don't provide a welcoming habitat for it is you keep the foliage dry. And here's a factoid: if you keep a leaf wet for 6 hours, that's enough for a fungus spore to take hold. So
are you talking about plant spreading when you're talking about keeping them dry?
Well, just a location where you have air circulation. If you've got your house here and a huge fence here, probably backed up into the corner, it could work, but that's not the best place in the world. And crowding things and keeping them as damp and stagnant as possible, that's not good. So, and of course, just a other little deal, the earlier in the day that the the rose has sunlight on its foliage, the better. If there's a heavy dew, if it gets sun early in the morning, that dew is leaving right away. If it doesn't get sun until 1 o'clock, that dew's on there for hours and hours. That's long enough for fungus to get a start. So you could still do it, but that's not the most advantage. If you have a site where you don't have any choice, you don't have any choice. But if you do, make it one that facilitates the health of the roses. Good air circulation, and of course, and then we get to water, and we just kind of hit on it. Water's not for the foliage. So if you have a water wand and you like to be artistic with the wand and wet the foliage and tiptoe, water's for the roots. Foliage, if it didn't get wet at all, that's fine. Of course, now if we have one of those dust storms and you see Lubbock on the horizon coming this way, well, the next day you might be forgiven for washing it off the foliage. But other than that, wetting the foliage, it's not a plus. So drip irrigation, things like that keep the water off the foliage are the best. And let's see. And of course, in general, when we're talking about water, roses are not a drought-tolerant plant. Although there's two categories there, or ways of thinking about it. Roses are extremely resilient. They can live through drought. And if it gets really dry, they'll dump their foliage. And you look at their stems, and their stems look really good. Well, they've just done one of their survival techniques. If times are tough and I can't support this foliage with the water that I've got available, I'll dump the foliage and I'll wait for better times. So they are resilient. They are very drought tolerant as far as survival is concerned. But if you want them to look good, drought tolerance is not something that is going to make that happen. They want average or probably even a little more than average water, but not stagnant. They don't want to stand in it. They don't want it to be soggy. They want good drainage. You water it, it percolates through, the excess water drains away, and they're happy. But, and of course, one, I guess maybe somewhat of an aside to that is the landscape roses or drift roses, those kind of things, shrub roses. Once they're established, they're pretty tough. And in fact, that kind of speaks to the earth kind roses. Once they've got a big root system established, they're not needy. They'll perform. Just kind of keep an eye on them. So they're in that regard, those types of roses, they wouldn't really be any more needy than your typical shrubs. And let's see. A fertilizer, roses are heavy feeders. And that means probably a good way to, there's a term called weekly. Two different spellings there. The first one W-E-E and the second one W-E-A-K. So frequently, but not a lot at one time. When they're in their season and they're growing and blooming, they use up a lot of energy. So you can use granular types as kind of a basis, but then, interspersed in there, you could use water-soluble types, to help them through. We've got some examples. This is a typical synthetic granular that you would put into the soil, and then And kind of the equivalents, two examples of, see, like this one is 14, 12, 11. Let's see, this one's a 10, 7, 7, but these are organic. The advantage to them is, to me, it's kind of like organics are long-term approach, and synthetics are shorter term. They're immediate, but the organics are going to help build the fertility of the soil over time. Increase the microbes and just improve the soil in general. And then we've got a couple, of the water solubles. So, these are the kind of things that you could, they're concentrated. You shake them up, dilute them in water, and these, you could use these every 7 or 10 days, just to kind of give them a shot in the arm. And of course, when a rose goes through a bloom cycle and you have a bunch of spent flowers, that will be a particular time to give it a shot in the arm, because it's just expended a bunch of energy making those. So good timing there. And let's see.
So can we fertilize with not a rose fertilizer? Or is that specifically a rose fertilizer?
You can, it doesn't have to say roses on it, because, and the numbers on here, these are nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And of course, the first number, the most important. Around here, typically our soils have got a pretty fair amount of phosphorus in them, so that is not as important. Over time, you don't need to keep adding a bunch of phosphorus. So, but nitrogen is used quickly, and it's very water soluble, so it's either taken up by the roots or it leaches away. So it's not going to, you can't put it there and say, okay, that'll be there for the next couple months, because it won't be there for the next couple months. So
we do the rose once a month, and then we treat like
and these, well, these guys, one's like this, and go by directions on this one, but one's like this, I'll be doing it every 6 weeks or so. Yeah. And there's no magic. I mean, it's.
So which would you do weekly?
Weekly would be something like this, water soluble. Yeah, yeah. And these can be, and this would be an exception to the not on the foliage thing. Some of these, they can be somewhat absorbed by the foliage. So it doesn't hurt to get them on, do foliar feeding with those, but also the roots. And let's see. Time for a little more.
But it's not either or. It should be
No,
a combination.
no. Yeah. And see, it's not my way or the highway.
Right.
And the roses are not going to read the labels, but you're going to see it in the performance, because they are heavy feeders, and if you're not, and like I say, weekly. In other words, it's not like if you're not shoveling it onto them, they're going to crater. It's just, it's being diminished and used and leached away. So kind of keep up with it.
When do we start fertilizing? Do we start right now, or
Yes.
when it's
If they're actively going, they will be using it. As soon as you put it on there and water it in, they'll be taking it up and making use of it. Let's see. And now to the subject of soils. And some of our soils around here, that may be generous to call them soils. May even be generous to call them dirt, because some can be pretty awful. Clay, although good thing to say about clay is it tends to have a decent amount of mineral content. One of the main things that it is really short on is organic matter, which is typically 1 or 2%, which being higher helps. And of course, a result of it having that little is that the other thing that it's typically really short of is air. And air in the soil is just as important to roots as moisture. And one of the reasons for that is that it's important to the little microbes, and they're what make the roots work. And if you harken back to your science class, when they describe things as aerobic or anaerobic, and we're not talking jazzercise here, we're talking the amount of air in the soil. If you have heavy clay, and especially if it's kind of moist, it's anaerobic. There's not much air or oxygen in it. There aren't many spaces for it, and those spaces are probably occupied by water. So that's a tough situation. So to improve the performance of roses and just about anything else around here, we would incorporate organic matter into the soil. And for roses, since they have the potential for a pretty good root system, you want to give them space for that. So it's a good idea to add organic matter. We have a planter's mix, and the ingredients in that are aged pine bark, compost, and sphagnum peat. And those will improve the texture of the soil, which will improve the microbial life in the soil. And that means the roots are going to be working better, and they're going to have access to the food in the soil.
So after a rose bush is planted, how do you get air into it? I mean, you do that to begin with, and then
Best in advance. And you cultivate this into 12 to 15 inches, and then afterwards, and of course, you're going to basically, if you put like 4 inches of this into the top 12 or 15 inches of soil, you dig it up, you're automatically going to have a raised bed. You can't not have a raised bed, because if you've ever done it, you get a shovel and you dig up some clay and you throw out the soil to the side, and then you have a hole there. If you want to go home and see if you can prove me wrong, you can dig a hole and then you can throw that soil back in the hole. And I guarantee you automatically have a raised bed, because when you dug it out, you just fluffed that soil. You just loosened it up. And when you put it back on there, I don't care how hard you jump up and down on it, you're still going to have a mound of soil, because you just fluffed it. And over time, it will slowly recompress. But once you fluffed it, it's raised up there. If you, in addition to that, you add this, well then, and mix this in, well then it's not a homogeneous clay, clods. It's a mixed soil situation, and it'll be even more raised. And then you'll increase the microbial activity, and some of the bigger chunks here, they will break down and become smaller and become more dispersed through the soil. And the magic thing that you do then, and I think it's next on my list of notes here, let me double check. There it is, I'm clairvoyant. The next thing, mulches. Because here our soil is clay. Even after you add this to it, it's going to be predominantly clay. And when clay dries, what does it do? It crusts over. It goes from goo to more like a brick. So what you want to do, once you've mixed this in, you put the mulch over it. I like hardwood mulch because there's good news and bad news. It depends on your perspective. Mine is a gardener's perspective. And the hardwood mulch, it breaks down faster than the other mulches. If you don't want to garden and you want to put mulch on there one time and you want it to last forever, well, see, that's the bad news. It's not going to do it. It's going to break down into the soil. So the mulch that you put on now, by the end of the summer, or certainly by the fall, if you go out there digging around looking for it, it's not going to be there. It's gone. It's broken down into the soil. And this kind of speaks to what you're talking about is, how do you keep it? Once you've done that improvement, you put that mulch on there and it breaks down and enters the soil. And then when you add more, it does the same thing. And over time, your soil texture continues to improve and improve and improve. So, and it doesn't stop. We have a long growing season here, which means the mulch is always breaking down, which is a good thing. You know, it's always breaking down into the soil, or it could blow away, you know. So, but add it. It's, you know, it's, and what that does too is on the soil surface, even after you've added this, worked it in, you know, you water or it rains, and the little things kind of percolate down. You got clay on the top, and it crusts. And it doesn't take it very long. Of course, a windy day like today, even if these windy days are not hot, typically when they're from the north, the humidity is very low, so it's drying that all the time. So when that becomes dry, what does it do? When water hits it, it repels it. Same thing as, you know, the sponge in the kitchen. When it gets really dry and you put it under the faucet, the water just rolls off of it. You're going to be there a while getting that thing wet again. But then once it gets wet, you can wring it out and put it under the faucet, turn the faucet on. The water immediately goes into it. And that's what putting mulch on top does. At the bottom of the mulch, where the top of the soil level is, once you have that mulch on there, that never dries out. And does the same thing as a sponge. If it doesn't dry out, when water hits it, it absorbs it, goes into the soil. And that's how things, and when you fertilize, it goes into the soil. And there's an exchange of air. So, let's see. And of course, it never hurts to have the soil separated from foliage, because there are soil pathogens that, when they're splattered on to the foliage, you know, that's an entrance for fungus onto the foliage. The mulch kind of keeps them separated, which is a good thing. Now we're going to talk about, we talked a little bit about the types of roses. We'll chat a little bit about companions. And I've got three things I'm going to talk about on companions, and that is, let's see. I get the first one out of the way. Oh, because it involves the heavy lifting. Well, this is a holly. You may think that's not a nice companion. It's kind of pokey, but you know, when people mention that to me, I tell them I so seldom pet my shrubs that it doesn't really bother me, you know. So if you get mad at him, you could be in trouble. You slap this guy, you're going to bleed. But here, let me see. And the companion feature that I'm talking about here is, see if you kind of look at that flower there. Well, that's gorgeous, but how much neater is it when it's got a dark green background? It just makes it pop when it's against a dark green background. So that's a neat companion thing of not just having it out in the middle of nowhere. Even if you had a flower bed out in the yard, it'd be worth having this kind of some of these kind of in the middle, so that everything in front of them has a dark green background. It makes all the colors pop when they've got a dark green background. And we kind of got into my other neat thing about companion is, you know, the colors. Now this is pretty yellow, and this is pretty blue. But when you put them together, they're even more yellow and more blue. And if you just want to be super cool, if you look closely on this one, see it's got little bits of yellow in it. And the blue, you know, you put three things together and all of a sudden it's a party. Nobody's disagreeing with me. So, you know, and that's part of the fun of it. And of course, here's another companion aspect to it. You know, this silvers, dark green does one kind of thing to set other things off, but grays and silvers, you know, they also do a job of setting all the colors off. And that leads me to the next feature of companions. Oh. And that is, there they are. And of course, here we get into the other feature of companions is that that can perform more than one function. Where? There it is. I saw it and it didn't get into my brain. Okay. Well, see, this has a neat function of a companion of colors, but also companions can be protectors and beneficials. Catmint, not catnip, catmint, M-I-N-T, catmint. This is a tough guy, blooms all through the summer, full sun, and deer don't like it.
What about rabbits?
They don't like it either. And then, of course, this one, the Artemisia, and this one is a variety, Powys Castle, which is, there are numerous varieties. This one, of all of them, does better here than any of the others. Very tough. You know, I think it's hardy to zone 4. I don't even want to think about zone 4. If I having a nightmare, I'm in zone 4. But deer hate this too. And, you know, it doesn't weigh much, I can pass it around. If you just,
Is this just green? Does it have flowers?
that's what it doesn't. Well, I mean, occasionally it does, but rarely. But you just do your hand over it and give a whiff, and you can see why deer might not like it, you know. It doesn't smell, you know, like lettuce. It's kind of repugnant. So that will kind of help, because deer love to eat roses, I'm sure. But they don't like these guys. So if you have them in the area, I don't issue guarantees, but they're not going to like it. And then the other quality of companions, this is bronze fennel, and it's a perennial. Butterflies love it, especially their caterpillars. They will eat it up, but it is attractive to many beneficial bugs that prey on, you know, pests of roses. So a neat thing to have around. Of course, of a neat color, they can get 5 or 6 feet tall, and kind of a neat color to have around, a neat texture, and all.
Called again?
bronze fennel. And the swallowtail butterflies, they like bronze fennel, regular fennel, or parsley. And they will, in fact, I guess a year or two ago, I saw one out here. It was about the right time, and we had fennel with the roses. And here she came up, and she was performing a behavior that looked distinctly like a butterfly laying eggs, which I went over there after she left, and there were eggs on the. And a few days later, we had big striped caterpillars on there. So I have had people here in the past that show up when we have a bunch of fennel over there, and they want some with caterpillars and some without. So
I thought they only did the milkweed.
that is monarchs. The ones I'm talking about are swallowtails.
I planted last year and it was constant.
Yeah,
They ate the whole.
yeah, they are gonna be about. And well, see, just the other day inside we have some milkweed on Sunday when I was watering, and there was a monarch on it, and the other butterflies were on other things. Okay. Let's see. Okay, pruning, of course, on shrub roses, not going to be much. I mean, you're going to kind of shape them, but not a big deal. And on generally roses, your floribundas, hybrid teas, those kind of things, or even shrub roses, you can in February prune them back by about half, get rid of old canes, and then in the end of August, you could cut them back by a third, because typically the roses are going to like it here from now through end of June. By the end of June, hotter than they'd like, hotter than I'd like. July and August, their blooms will diminish. They will be smaller. They won't be as pretty of a color. And so you can prune them back by a third the end of August. And as we get into September, our fall here is kind of like a second spring. In fact, it's kind of nicer than spring, because the nice thing about fall is every day the weather's getting milder rather than, worse. And our fall here, roses love it. So good time to prune them. And of course, when you're pruning, you're at that time, especially on floribundas or hybrid teas, you will be, of course, I won't be looking like this in February, but you will be, here's outside. So typically on a rose, you're wanting it to have a relatively open center and be a vase shape. So when you prune, of course, in February, this will just be a bud. So you would prune above outward facing buds. You're telling it, go this way and you'll be happier. So you prune above it, and when it grows out this way. And you keep the center relatively open. And then when you, at this time of year, when you deadhead, it sounds like abuse, but it's not. Well, there's an example. Let me see if I've got another one. Here's a better one. Typically, hybrid teas are single bloom on a stem. This guy's trying to give me a hard time, having two of them there. So here's the perfect example, and it's cooperating with us. So this guy's done. So you don't have to do this in two steps. I'm just going to do it for illustration purposes. I'm going to cut that and get him out of the way. And now as we go down, This is a 3-leaflet leaf. And then here we have a 5-leaflet leaf. And then here we have the next 5-leaflet leaf. So you will prune down a little above the second 5-leaflet leaf. And if you had really good vision, much better than mine, you can see there's just between the leaflet leaf and the stem, there's a little bud down in there. Well, he will take over and come out. And when you prune back to the second 5-leaflet leaf, the growth coming out of there will produce a flower. You know, that's why you're cutting that far back.
And that's in August.
No. This is just through the season.
Through the season.
You know, you do the February, you do the end of August. That's just general shaping and getting things, you know, started, so to speak. You know, one gets it started for the spring and summer, the other one gets it started for the fall. Now this is just maintenance through the season. You're going to be deadheading. And that's what we just did to that guy. And of course this one, I wouldn't go that far back. I would just take off this bloom and let this guy happen. And then here's the 3-leaflet leaf. On the other side, we've got a 5-leaflet leaf. And then here's the second 5-leaflet leaf, and you'd cut above that. And let's see, where are we? And of course, and the one I showed you, that's a hybrid tea, basically where you got a flower on the stem. Now when you're doing and I don't know if I have well, here's a, and a floribunda, which kind of a similar looking flower, but they'll have multiple buds. So on these guys, you know, when this guy finishes, you just cut the stem of him off because you've got 2 buds on the side. You know, if you trim back as far as you did on the hybrid tea, you'd be losing buds and flowers. So, but then when these guys finish, you can cut it back. You'll see growth coming below it. You know, so you're coming back a couple inches. So you got growth here and here, and those guys will produce flowers. But you're just kind of picking the ones that are gone and leaving the other buds to do their thing. And let's see. And let's see. Okay. And of course, I already mentioned that. I'll just mention it again. But roses, they'll kind of take a break in July, August. So don't, you know, if the blooms are smaller and the color's not as nice and whatever, don't think there's something wrong. 105 discourages a lot of things in this world. In fact, there's a, you know, I guess the USDA hardiness zone map, that thing's been out, it's been around longer than me. But that talks about winter hardiness, the average winter temperature. But like 30 years ago or 40 years ago, how time flies, because I was here when it came out. So, but they have a heat zone map, and that's talking about the number of days per year that are above 86 degrees, because typically around 85, 86 degrees, above that, physiologically, that's kind of a change for plants. You know, roses, if it never got above 85 degrees, they would say, yes, as would I. But so that's why in July, August, they tend to take a break because it just, and in fact, here in the nursery, we'll have tropical hibiscus, and in July and August, they'll still bloom, but not as quickly and not as nicely. And then when the temperature drops from like 105 to 93, all of a sudden they start getting much happier because it's just as you're getting closer to 86, it's just different. So don't be alarmed by that. And of course, if you have some of these companions around, some of these guys, 105 is just fine. So they'll be at some of their peak performance. Let's see. Okay. Now we'll talk about pests, which typically you've got black spot, powdery mildew, fungus problems. Black spot, you'll see some black spots, but you'll see yellow leaves. And then powdery mildew, just like it sounds, looks like a white kind of powder on the leaf. You know, the same, just a general purpose fungicide will take care of those, but we have enough sun, we have good air circulation, we're not wetting the foliage. Those are the kind of things that make that less likely. And also, we're feeding roses on a regular basis because in general, any plant that's vigorous is less likely to have, health issues. It just that's the way it is for living things. If it's robust, then problems are diminished. And so fungus problems typically here are not that great because our humidity is not, this isn't Beaumont, so that helps. And then the other common problems, aphids, which anything that puts on succulent new growth, it's like a dinner bell for aphids. It's like they're wimpy little things and they're sucking insects. And soft new growth, succulent new growth, it's like a fresh salad for us. It's like, ooh, we're here. So, but their bad news is they don't lay eggs, they bear live young. The nerve. So their populations can go big quick because they're all out there having live babies. That's the bad news. The good news is they're fragile. They're soft-bodied. They're not a beetle. They don't have a big exoskeleton to protect them. If you just get your hose out, put your thumb on the end, and blast them off, that may be the end of the problem. Or if you have some ladybugs show up. Ladybugs and ladybug larvae eat aphids like there's no tomorrow. It's like a hot dog eating contest for them. I mean, as fast as they can eat them. And they can, I've seen years ago, I had some of these in front of my house. They got gray aphids on them. I walked out and I looked at it and it looked like the whole thing was moving. And I thought, what? I quickly ran and put on my eyeballs and looked, and they were covered with gray aphids. And I mean thousands. And I thought I could spray. And then I looked and I saw a couple little ladybugs. And I thought, I'm going to give them a shot. So I looked at it the next day, a whole bunch of ladybugs and ladybug larvae. And I mean an army of them. And it was like 1 or 2 days later, I went out there. There was not an aphid to be seen. And I thought, when I tell this story, these people are thinking, he embellishes things because it couldn't be this dramatic. Well, I saw it, and I thought to myself, if I hadn't seen it, I wouldn't believe it because there were so many of them. But I mean, those little ladybugs, man, it's like, and then it were clean, and I kept an eye on them. They were all gone, and the plants were just fine. So, ladybugs, yeah. And but let's see. If you had to, you can do a spray like spinosad, soap, and spinosad. It's rated as organic, you can use it on vegetables and stuff like that. So, the key thing is you wouldn't do it on a day like today because you're going to get as much on you as on the plant with the wind. So I discourage that. But that will take care of them. If your first initial just blasting them off doesn't do it, you can come back with something like that. And then the other pest that's significant, and that is if you see your blooms and they're kind of brown edges, and when they get to this point they'd really be ugly. But when they're not just open a little bit, you see brown edges up here, then it's pretty safe bet that you have thrips. 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 And they are, I read something that said they're almost microscopic. Well, that's an embellishment. They're not that.
Animals?
They're bugs.
They're bugs.
They're not that small. But when you have them, and I can even, well, sometimes I might have to put my eyeballs on, but even if you don't, what you do is you kind of look down in there, and when you do that, they're about that long, and they're longer than wide. They're not a fat bug. They're a slender, skinny little bug, but they move fast. So when you look in there like that, if they're there, especially on something like a light flower or yellow or whatever, when you do that, they will race for the dark when you've exposed them to the light, and you'll see them moving around. So at that point, it's insecticide time. But if I were to see them on a rose like this, I would take every bloom that was open at all. I'd prune them all off and throw them in the trash. I would leave, green buds you could leave, but I'd even spray those with the insecticide. But if they're still closed up, there's no place for them to hide. So you could spray and you'd get them. And when you cut these other guys off, put them immediately into a bag, most of the population's going into a trash bag because that's where they hang out, is in the blooms and buds that are open at all. And then spray the closed buds. Everything else goes immediately in a trash little bag and is thrown away. That 95% of the population goes with that. Then you spray, and then just keep an eye out after that. They're not that difficult to deal with.
With the soapy water, or does that work?
I would use something with a. Well, you could use something with like a soapy insecticide / neem oil, because they're small enough that neem oil they're not going to cope with that very well. But that's generally it about the pests, and then now we're down to equipment.
When you dig in the,
Yep.
for a rose and in the clay or whatever you call it, about how much does the roots grow out? I mean, how much of an area should you put so that the roots can grow and
They will be vigorous. They will fill it.
Oh, okay. So the rose is here, so a good
Yeah, 2 by 2,
2 by 2. Okay.
pretty quick.
That's so I can't put like that. Maybe something large like that. This large pile.
Oh yeah. Oh sure. Yeah. In fact, I didn't know there was going to be so much physical work involved in this, but
So how long can you leave them in a pot before transplanting them in the ground?
a long time.
A long time. Oh, okay.
And this will ultimately limit the size of the plant, but and it will easily fill this with roots. But you water more often, and of course you keep fertilizing. This is the quintessential time of you're going to be fertilizing more frequently because you're watering more frequently. Nitrogen is being either used up or leached out. So you have to be a little more conscientious about when you have things in pots that
And make sure there's drainage, right?
right. It's got a drainage hole or it's doomed. And
I'll have to at some point change out that dirt. 'Cause I have like these big whiskey barrels and they're wood.
a very long time, the dirt's not going to go bad. Now, over time, it will break down and it'll sink. You know, and you'll have less dirt in there and less. And you know, in fact, I've got a peewee hydrangea at home that I have a little pot bigger than this and taller than this, and it's been in there over 10 years. And I need to. It'll go back in the same pot, but the soil has broken down to the point that it's kind of getting lower and lower. So I'll slip it out, loosen up the roots, maybe do a little root pruning, add soil, and put it back in there, and he'll be off to the races again. So, and of course, pruning, you can prune roots. The key is you on roots and on stems, you want it to be a clean cut, and that will heal and it'll branch out new roots. So, and it's
Cut off the roots. Prune roots.
yeah, well, selectively. You know, if you've got a bunch wrapped at the bottom, or you know, I mean, you don't use a machete, but you know, selectively prune, especially old roots, and of course, when you slip things out, typically new roots are light colored. If you see roots that are brown, and then you kind of rub it and the membrane on there kind of rubs off. That's an old dead root. You know, he's got to go. You know, roots are typically light colored. You know, but that can go for a very long time. But I've put things in pots this deep and this big around, and they were up here. And when I switched to something else, and of course it was a pot shaped about like that, but taller. So it wasn't curved. So there wasn't anything to restrict it from coming out. And when I got it out of there, the root ball was in exactly the same shape as the pot. And there was a netting of roots all the way around and all the way to the bottom, and it held the soil in exactly the shape of the pot. So they will go down and fill it and use it all. So, and let's see. Well, I have talked about roses, and well, let's see. Here are some, if you can't recognize it, you know, it's a dream. You know, neat colors, tough guys, and if you're doing a rose bed, kind of neat to do, you know, a grass or two out there, put a different texture in there, and also have a neat seasonal thing. You know, they'll put on their seed heads. When it gets cold, they'll change colors. And this is the and of course, when you're doing a rose bed or whatever, perennials are a natural to companions for it. And almost all the perennials are sun oriented. So, you know, they make the other things pop. And if you want to put a tropical in there too, you know, that's a plumbago. So, and that's so you're, and another little perennial, or tender perennial, Mexican heather. Man, this is the quintessential companion plant, because Mexican heather on its own would never get a date. You know, never. Nobody's going to ask it out. But as a companion, you know, to other things, you know, it just really sets off. And of course, in the winter, it'll die to the ground, but they're pretty good about coming back. And this is another one. Can't get too hot. If it's 105, it's good. And here's, you know, another one, Gara. It gets big long stems with the little white flowers. So it will look neat with, you know, this is a neat one for red roses. Be a gorgeous thing around them. It gets tall and airy stems with the little white blooms. And then, of course, here's another annual coleus. This guy gets big. It's a sun coleus. You'll take a lot of sun. And not only that, super neat color. And see this color, potato vine, you know, same kind of color. And of course, it doesn't hurt. It has a really charming name, wasabi. I'm not making that up. Purple heart, you know, it'll disappear in January, but
That used to have a different name, right?
well, purple heart's the common name.
Purple heart.
Yeah, and some people call it wandering Jew, but yeah,
Same thing. Okay.
yeah, but that's neat. Full sun or a lot of shade, but it'll take full sun. And then, of course, here's a cool one, you know, pin cushion. And these guys are neat. They butterflies love them, and they're evergreen.
What are they? What's the name?
That's a pin cushion. Yeah.
Thank you.
And in January or February, foliage is going to be just gorgeous. And I guess we're about at it. So thanks for tuning in to Fossil Creek. And next week, we're going to do butterfly gardening. So it'll be, some of these guys will be back to tell us about themselves.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thanks.